right now. So from talking about palm oil or palm fruit in Malaysia, let's talk about financial inclusion. That's a common topic these days. Well, some numbers actually show that at this point, we still have about 43% of the population in sub-Saharan Africa as unbanked. Assessing that progress, and then you also have this. This is by the IMF. They gave this number, so you can see right there. 43% of the population has traditional bank account. That's less than half, right? 17% of total global unbanked population are in Africa. Not very nice, yes? Then Democratic Republic of Congo has 26% unbanked. Angola has 29%, Ethiopia has 35%, and then overall it's estimated that about 360 million adults in the region do not have access to any form of bank, roughly 17% of the total globally. That's it. And overall, 90% of all payments and transactions in Africa are made via cash. Right, so we're still heavy on the unbanked. It does seem that from this number. But let's get the perspective of a product strategy expert, Adeoluwa Oni. Adeoluwa joins us from our Abuja studio. Hi, Adeoluwa. Good afternoon and welcome to the program.
Hello, Edie. Good afternoon. How are you doing?
I'm good. You're welcome. So, I mean, we talk a whole lot about fintechs, the impact growing in different parts of Africa. We have different apps and different parts of types of fintechs that seem to be making progress. And yet we still have this huge number. Are the numbers wrong, or is there something we're missing?
I think the reality we have in Nigeria is that the fintechs, they have the shareholders to respond to. So what you really see is there's a lot of activity. However, this activity is focused on the urban areas. So you really see that deep penetration in these rural areas, and the rural areas are from the middle belt of the country towards the upper northern part of the country. So yes, they're doing activities. I wouldn't want to delve deep into their numbers, but the reality is that our financial inclusion numbers are still relatively low. We have about 26% of the adult population currently still largely financially excluded as of 2023. So there's still a lot to be done, despite all the news and stories that we heard so far.
So how can we accelerate this? I know that at the heart of it, of course, is infrastructure, because even when you want the fintechs to be effective, they need infrastructure. And just as you noted, there's no infrastructure in the urban areas, so perhaps that's why they're thriving there. In the rural, there's a lot of struggle, not just in Nigeria, looking at Africa now. Perhaps we should give special attention to infrastructural funding if we want these numbers to change.
Yes, you are absolutely spot on. If you look, not just in Nigeria, as I've said, one of the major barriers is the infrastructure and digital infrastructure. So we don't have a good amount of broadband penetration across the sub-Saharan African belt. So you see locations or rural areas where they don't even have the right networks to even make phone calls. So if you can't make phone calls, then how would you convince someone to get a feature phone? And then how do you upgrade someone from a feature phone to even get a smartphone to be able to download an application or to do anything with it? So the right infrastructure needs to be there, starting from even basic digital infrastructure, so things like telecoms, broadband, and then we're beginning to move into financial infrastructure. So you see, even when you look at Nigeria as a small microcosm of the situation, you realize that there aren't so many banks. The more you move towards these rural locations, and maybe for business reasons, for other reasons, but the access is very, very low. And so we depend on last mile type delivery to get financial services to these excluded. So yes, infrastructure is a very big gap, and until we solve the infrastructural gap, then we can solve other elements that affect financial inclusion, like people not having enough or lack of credit and otherwise.
So we've seen some attempts, to bypass some of this major infrastructure challenge. For instance, people use USSD, you don't need the internet, so even though you still need infrastructure for that, I guess it's less than what you would need for the very high end. What else? I mean, you're a product strategy expert. What else can you say some of these fintechs can adopt into their plans, into their products to accelerate this financial inclusion that we've all been desiring for on the continent?
The reality is we have to all play to our strengths, and we also have to play within the constraints of the situation or the constraints of the reality. So we know that a mobile banking app or another app would not really solve the problem. So we have to think on low-tech solutions. So very good, you mentioned USSD. So we have banks who have sort of done a huge amount of work in leading the mobile banking space. But then we also have the telcos who have the largest penetration across the country and across the sub-Saharan African belt. So we can even take the playbook from the Eastern African, where they have mobile money that has really penetrated to these rural locations. However, the concern that we see in Nigeria is, yes, these tools exist, but they aren't as adopted as with the financially excluded. So there's a lot to be done in terms of focusing on those low-tech solutions. So USSD is an excellent, very good method for introducing financial services to these excluded regions. And secondly, there needs to be that whole intentionality in encouraging and driving the adoption of these services, which moves into elements around identity. So you realize that majority of the financially excluded people, they don't really have the required identity to play for the fintechs to onboard them and play within the constraints of the regulation from the Central Bank of Nigeria and from the respective country's central bank. So there's a lot of work to be done around developing low-tech solutions, scaling those low-tech solutions, and also working with the government to ensure that the identity required, the identification required, the rurally excluded people have this identity, so that by the time they come on board, they can easily serve them. And it's all about trust. So what you see is that a lot of these people is not just for lack of not having money, but there is a big trust issue. So there's a concern around, if I'm transferring money, how am I sure that the money is going to get sent, or how am I sure that the receiver is going to get it on time? So there's a lot of work around ensuring that your solutions really do solve that problem of speed and reliability. So if an individual makes a transfer and he or she is not sure that that money is going to pass through, then there's a big problem. And that's on the basic element of transfer. There's also other elements across the financial services verticals that really need to be addressed, such as access to credit, especially. So we have about, I think in Nigeria, about 6% of the population have access to credit. So that's a huge gap, because without credit, there's really no money to facilitate financial inclusion or to facilitate any form of financial growth for the rural population.
Well, noting all of this, and these are no new factors or conversation that we've had, what trend do you see in the next, maybe like the end of this year? Do you see perhaps some of these challenges giving accelerated attention and changes being made maybe by the end of 2025?
I see there is an intentional effort. I see, and we can see all around, we've seen the major players in the country that have really done a lot of work to expand or to drive financial inclusion. We've seen them moving up the ladder in the financial services chain to get more licenses, to introduce more consumer-led products. So we are seeing that level of intentionality towards driving this financial inclusion. And towards, as we progress, moving to the end of the year, even next year into the near future, there is that hope, I would say, with respect to people becoming more financially included. We see a lot of policies around driving infrastructure development. And once the right cables are being laid across the nation and across these affected regions, we begin to see a bit of opening and economic uplift within this region. And with the right economic uplift and the right tools, there's definitely light at the end of the tunnel.
All right, we'll hope to see that light soon. Adeoluwa Oni, product strategy expert. Thank you so much for the insights from your perspective.
Thank you, Ini.